I really thought I'd already done this, but I guess I didn't. So, the Vancouver Canucks are a team that currently sits above the cap. They'll get themselves under the cap by waiving a couple of guys after training camp, is my guess. The Vancouver Canucks also are a team that everybody's talking about because of who's gone. So, after that run through Minnesota and St. Louis, before running into the brick wall that was the Vegas Golden Knights, Markstrom, Tanev, Toffoli, Stetcher, Fantenberg were all parts of that, either in greater or lesser roles. Levo was hurt. Demang didn't play during the return, but makes a mean apple pie, right? So 4 of those guys have gone to Calgary, which is weird, right? And of course, losing these players has created a certain amount of outcry amongst Vancouver fans. I'm a little more muted on that. I mean, yes, Markstrom was the goalie, but we know that Demko is going to be the starting goaltender. Tanev, the argument is Tanev past his best days? I would argue yes, and he had a great run in the playoffs, but I would argue yes. His best days are probably ones he's already played. I wanted him to stick around. I wanted Markstrom to stick around, but I understand that just financially, dishing out $10 million combined between Markstrom and Tanev would have made other moves impossible for Vancouver. And Toffoli, they barely had a conversation with him because they knew they couldn't keep him. So, and again, I understand that there will be a lot of discussion about Jim Benning. There always is. There's people who defend Benning and there's people who can't stand Benning. I'm really neither. I can see why people don't like some of his moves. I can also understand why people do like some of his moves. And I don't know anybody that likes every move he's made. I definitely don't. When this channel was starting up, I was not a fan of Benning's, but over the last few years, I've basically accepted he's a pretty good general manager in a lot of respects. He does have some of the free agent contracts that are signed cause you to kind of have a moment, but you know it's generally a decent picture for the Vancouver Canucks. So let's take a look at the forward group, and I know I've only got 4 centers on the board, but technically a lot of the guys on the wing can play center if they need to. Sutter being an obvious example. So your first line, Miller, Pettersson, and Besser. The interesting thing is, I think with Brock Besser, as long as he knows Pettersson's on the ice, I think he's going to look to get him the puck. I think that's a big part of the reason why his goal totals dropped last year. And I honestly, I wouldn't be opposed to having Besser on the same line as Horvat. And maybe giving Virtanen a chance on that top line. Look, I know people don't like Virtanen. There's plenty of people who don't like Virtanen. But he had 18 goals. He can be a really good player. Yeah, there might be a maturity issue there and a motivation issue there, but he can be an excellent player. So we'll see where things go with him. And on that second line, of course, it's Horvat and Pearson that are going to be together. And ideally for Canuck fans, of course, they wanted Toffoli on that second line, and then Virtanen probably traded. That was where Canuck fans had it going. Virtanen likely on his way out of town. And then you sign Toffoli and you keep him on that second line. But he's gone now. Roussel on the third line with Gaudette and Sutter. I would say Gaudette's going to be the third line center for the Canucks for the foreseeable future. And Pettersson, Horvat, and Gaudette. I have a hard time remembering when I've seen that strong of a center spot for the Canucks. Maybe back when we had Malhotra, Kessler, and Sedin. But on some level, I kind of like this trio better if Gaudette hits his ceiling. So we'll see how things go for Gaudette this year. And of course, Sutter, it's the last year of his contract. So for people who don't like his contract, I understand. I think he's a very useful player for them, having watched them live. I think it was 6 times this last year where I went to games. And I thought, I really like Sutter. Because again, when you're watching on TV, you don't get the full picture of what's going on the ice. So there's certain players that I've gained more respect for after having seen them live than I might if I watched them on TV. So Roussel, Gaudette, and Sutter. Sutter may end up putting up a couple more goals and points than he normally would. Contract year can happen. Fourth line, Mott, who of course became kind of a folk hero in Vancouver with the way that he played in the playoffs. Beagle, is he overpaid? Sure. Roussel's kind of overpaid too, but it's done. And of course, I think McEwen ends up on that fourth line as well. Now, where the issues show up, Berchi and Eriksson both do not make that lineup. Both of them likely demoted to the AHL this coming season. Now, wouldn't it be interesting? Let's say the NHL started their season in January. The AHL didn't start their season until February. How do you demote guys to the AHL if there's no AHL to demote them to? So, do they stay with the team? Do they go to Utica? Does Utica have a training camp that starts at the end of December? Do they pay for that? Like, it's a lot of questions about next season, right? Now, also on this list, Howardluck. And interestingly enough, they just signed Jace Howardluck. And I have a hard time finding exactly where he fits in the lineup. So I'll say he's most likely to be the 13th forward. He's most likely to be the guy who's a healthy scratch and jumps in where need be. But I think the Canucks like Howardluck. Keep in mind when he was going to be drafted, his draft year, the Canucks were high in Howardluck, and he was gone just before they got up to the draft podium. So, or the draft table. Wasn't a first rounder, obviously. But Howardluck they like, so he will get every opportunity, I think, to be a regular in this lineup. And then also, of course, Michael Ferland. Is he going to play? If Ferland is healthy and can play, that changes the whole picture. But if he's not able to play, then that frees up the cap space. They don't have to worry about necessarily waiving Eriksson. Maybe Eriksson becomes the 13th forward. I don't know. We'll see, right? And of course, Hoglander. Canuck fans excited about Hoglander. I don't see a spot for him on the roster right now. I don't. I think you look down the left, you got Miller, Pearson, Roussel, and Mott. That's pretty well structured in terms of who's on what line and what their role is. So I don't see Hoglander pushing anybody out this year. He'll get into the lineup probably next year when Podkolzin is hopefully coming over and playing. Now on the right side behind Eriksson, we got Cole Lind, who had a very good year in Utica. And I think he's going to push for an NHL job. He could give Jim Benning a really tough job here if he looks like he's ready to go and he's got guys ahead of him that he's trying to push out of jobs. But the Canucks have shown with guys like Gagne, with Berchi, that if somebody outplays them and they lose their role with the team, the Canucks don't mind waiving them. So if Brandon Sutter ends up getting pushed out of a role by one of these other young kids, the Canucks have never been shy about necessarily pulling a guy out of their lineup if they have to, and putting the best roster on the ice. And I've got Justin Bailey up there. He, of course, would be a call-up and a fill-in where need be. He's decent as a call-up option. So the blue line is where all of the discussion is going to happen, I think, with the Canucks. The forward group is pretty solid. This team's going to score goals. Can they prevent them? Can they stop allowing so many shots as they did in the second half of the season this past year? Hughes and Schmidt, that's going to be a very good tandem. Hughes is a good two-way defenseman. Schmidt's a good two-way defenseman. And I think if those guys have immediate chemistry, that's huge. As much as we like to see Hughes with Tanev, and of course in his first year he had Luke Schenn that he had some chemistry with, if Schmidt and Hughes hit it off, that could be the first legit top two tandem the Canucks have had in a while. And no offense to Edler. Edler, I think, as a second-tier defenseman, as a still top four, but second pairing, I think it's better for him. I really do. I was never a huge fan of Edler as the number one defenseman. And paired with Myers, can work. Can work. I know the Myers contract is going to age badly. I get that. But in reality, you know, it's a contract that Jim Benning felt he had to sign because he had to revamp the blue line. And now here we are again. And they still need to revamp the blue line. And then after that, you've got Jordy Ben as likely top six. And Hugh Levy, you know what? He deserves a shot at a role with the team. He had the one game in the return, right? So one playoff game on his resume. He looked decent. They won the game. And I think he has every right to play on the team. How are we going to know whether this kid's really a bust or not? Well, he's got to play. Sautner, Chatfield, Rathbone, Rafferty. There are options here with some of these younger players. I know that Benning's already said he's a big fan of Chatfield and what he may be able to do, but I would like to see Hugh Levy in the lineup ahead of Chatfield. If Hugh Levy doesn't make this lineup and Chatfield does, then we can start having that discussion. Yep, Hugh Levy's likely a bust. Because we would be getting to that stage where you're far enough out from the draft, he's played enough games, he's been healthy for long enough, that if he's still not an NHL defenseman, then he's probably a bust. But The other thing with Levy is there's that potential as well that he could emerge as a top four defenseman at some point. I know that with each passing year that becomes less likely, but it's still there. He's not that old either. I like Rafferty. I know there were Canuck fans that wanted him to come up last year when the Canucks signed Rathbone. Canuck fans were excited. The interesting thing to me is that you see Tanev leave, you see Stetcher leave, and people freak out. But if you are a fan and you believe in what these other defensemen can do, like Rathbone, like Rafferty, like Levy, then there's nothing to panic about. There's nothing to panic about unless you say you trust these young defensemen coming up, but not really. Let's not give them a job. Let's not. Let's just complain that they're stuck in Utica, which is not a Canuck fan thing either. It happens with fans in every league, right? Every team, every league, everywhere, you'll hear, "Oh, that team's stupid because they don't let this rookie come up. Just give him a roster spot." It's not how it works. You got to make him earn it. Now in net, again, there'll be a lot of debate about the Vancouver Canucks net. Holtby, I still think is the starter. Demko is going to play probably 35, 40 games over an 80-game schedule. If it's a contracted 48-game schedule, then I would say 24 games for each goaltender, with DiPietro being the number 3. And I think DiPietro gets better every year, and it gives the Canucks an interesting future in the net because you've got Demko, looks like he's going to be a very good starter, and DiPietro is trending in that direction as well. There's some decisions they're going to have to make down the road, I'll say 2 years from now. But Holtby signed for those 2 years. So with Holtby, he's got a cup ring. It's a solid pickup. And I think the Canucks have done well here. They've got Schmidt. They've got Holtby. Adding members of the Capitals isn't a bad idea. The Capitals, a winning organization. They already had Jay Beagle as their fourth line center. So for Vancouver, I think that this year we could see them maybe around 4th or 5th in a Canadian division. Maybe they just missed the playoffs in the Canadian division. And I don't say that because I think that they're not good enough. I think the Canadian division could be that strong. If we have the regular divisions, I would say they'd end up being top 4 in the Pacific. And then it would come down to how the overall point totals work out as to whether or not they actually be a playoff team. I still believe the future is very, very bright for Vancouver. Are they a contender? Not yet. I think with the series against Vegas showed they're not ready to actually be a serious Stanley Cup contender yet. But there's reason for hope. This is a team that got out of the first round for the first time since 2011. So it's going to take some time, but I think all the pieces are there for a very bright future. So while people get upset, and rightfully so, about the players that are gone, I like to focus on who's still there. The depth is still there in my eyes, and we'll see what happens when the season starts, whenever that's going to be. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. As always, don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.